we all desire for this sense of belonging and the sense of worth and being seen and loved. And unfortunately, and I think this is what you're sharing, is especially when we're caught up in some desire to sin, even if it's not the will to sin, but we're caught up in some desire to do something that is sin, and then we find a group that will celebrate that with us. I mean, it's just game on.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Unlocking Greatness. I have got Daniel Farley with me today. As I've said, man, this is just becoming a broken record. I think I could put this on replay, but Daniel and I met through the platform X, formerly known as Twitter. One day we won't have to say formerly known as anymore because everybody will know it. But I just saw him as a good dude, doing things in this world for the Lord, trying to lead his family well. And then he sent me this YouTube video, which I normally would not watch just because I always make the excuse that I don't have time. And I sat and watched it, and his testimony was so amazing. So had to have a conversation. We did that. Now he's here today. So Daniel, what's up, dude?
What's going on, man? I appreciate the opportunity just to sit here and tell people about Christ and everything he's done for me in my life. And yeah, it's great. I appreciate this opportunity a lot.
Yeah, no, I mean, isn't that kind of crazy? I guess even as I was praying right before we started, it's wild for me to think that we were some bit of screwed up. We've talked about, very different in some ways, very similar in others. And yet God not only went out of his way to save us, but then he uses us to go tell other people about him. I'm like, and we know this from scripture, but it's like, why wouldn't he use a much better model, than this? Isn't that wild?
Man, I have thought about this over and over and over again about why me? Why me? And I look at my life now and the places I've been and with my background, I can reach people that the common pastor can't walk in and talk to. The dudes with the tattoos, the bikers, the people with addiction to past. A pastor's not going to sit down and talk to them. They're going to run them away. They, and that's the problem with church nowadays. And I made myself some notes, and this is one of them. It's the church pushes more people away nowadays than we're bringing in. And, the church is too busy looking at the denomination on the door or what you're wearing on Sunday morning when you walk in, rather than loving everybody and showing people what Christ is really like. Every time I've stood in a pulpit to tell people about Christ, I tell them, let's not worry about the name on the door. Welcome everybody in here. Show them love, because our first and foremost, we're supposed to go make disciples. And if God can use me, he can use anybody.
Yeah. So, well, and it's like when you say that, I always have a hard time hearing that because there's this part of me that says we should be turning people away because what we're saying is so provocative. Repent of your sin, turn, this God died for you. Like, it's crazy talk. It's absolute crazy talk. And so on one hand, I'm like, no, man, like it's got to be different. But you're so true. You're so right. I just finished watching, I don't know if you've seen the documentary on Netflix about Aaron Rodgers, the now Jets quarterback, but he grew up in what sounds like a very fundamentalist Baptist church. Obviously, you dressed a certain way, you said certain things. It was very black and white. And he says that's what turned him away. And I'm like, okay, I see that. And yet then it bothers me that he goes and, and finds this whole other spirituality and realm of life. But you're right. If the church doesn't find ways to clearly preach the gospel, right? Sin, death, redemption and restoration, then we're doing nothing. But at the same time, if we're alienating everybody, then how are we ever going to win anybody? So maybe off of that, my question kind of to start, because you do have a pretty cool story, and I don't do this all the time, but I think it's helpful. So where was this first realization or recognition for you personally that you were living in a bad way and you needed to make some sort of change?
I grew up, in a church, very, very fundamentalist church, like Aaron Rodgers, as we were talking about. Um, and after I had my first daughter, out of wedlock, I was excluded from that church. So that's what led me down the path of drugs, alcohol, women, failed marriage.
Can I pause you for a second? So I'm interested to hear. So like you say excluded, I can assume right away what that looked like, but like what did that look like? So you're in the church, unfortunately, many younger kids, actually even some older adults, are sleeping around outside of marriage. So you get your girlfriend pregnant, and
Yep.
what happens?
So I had moved in with her. I get a phone call one night saying, "Hey, the church is going to bring you up for excluded," which actually means you're not allowed to vote. You're living in sin. You need to come back and you need to repent to the church, to be accepted back in to be a full member. When I received the phone call, I was a 21-year-old man trying to take care of a newborn. It's like, well, the church has got to do what the church has got to do. I know where I am with Christ. So y'all do what you have to. So it pushed me away from church, the hypocritic side.
Did you
it was bad.
did you feel, sorry, but this is like very interesting to me. So did you feel at that time that you were not in sin and doing the right thing, or you were in sin, but you had to do this to do the right thing, and the church was wrong for how it was handling it, even though the church was right to condemn the fact that, or to call you out on the sin?
I knew I was wrong. I knew I was living in sin. Now, the Bible clearly states that if a brother is in sin, you go to him, you have a conversation with him. If he does not repent, then you bring somebody else with you, and then you keep on. I received one phone call from this church saying, "Hey," and the bad part is it was a family member, small town, and that's how it happened. And like I said, I knew I was living wrong. I knew it wasn't right. But when you get hurt like that in times of need, a lot of people see the church criticizing them, or, the church does not condone sin. I absolutely do not believe that at all in any way, shape, form, or fashion. But console those people. It's our job as Christians to show the love of Christ. The woman at the well, Christ went to her and told her, with me, you can have living water. Same thing. They should have came to me and talked to me more.
Yeah.
So it was really, it was a sad time in my life. It pushed me away from work. My daughter's mom and I never ended up getting married. I ended up marrying later on. But as far as getting back to your original question.
Well, I think just to stick there, because I think this is the place that a lot of people find themselves in with the church, right? Like every single one of us has fallen short of God's glory. The Bible is clear. If you are not a Christian, then it should be of no surprise that every non-Christian that walks into your church is living in sin, and in many ways,
Absolutely.
probably willfully. But even those that are not, that are Christians, every single one of your members in your church is falling into some sort of sin, willful or otherwise. And so I think it's really important that, and I like that you've shared this part, and this is why I'm like sticking here, is because people need to understand that like sin must be called sin. But at the same time, it is so important that once the sin has been committed, the church must take responsibility to walk that person back towards redemption and restoration. Yeah. And that, I think, was where you're saying that they clearly fell short. It was like, okay, I screwed up. I'm a 21-year-old kid, and you don't have to like celebrate my stupidity, but you got to love me now. And on top of that, I'm 21 and I have this responsibility. You need to be here to actually help me, which I think this is why we're losing, in many ways, losing the public narrative battle around abortion, is because it's like everybody wants to say it's wrong, and it is wrong. But when we're like, hey, you're wrong, you better go take care of that. It's like, no, you're wrong. Come to us so we can help you take care of that.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. Our church, and I heard a pastor say it one time, and he explained it, and it stuck with me. A church is supposed to be a hospital to where we come in and, we're going to do things, we're going to say things that are going to make you uncomfortable. We're going to make you better before you leave. And that's exactly the way a church should act, not casting stones at everybody. And we see it a lot in the South, especially me being from Tennessee here. But it shouldn't be. And I think that's part of my role, and where I'm going out now. Every time I speak at a different denomination, I'm preaching this over and over and over. It doesn't hurt my feelings one bit to stand in a pulpit and tell people to love sinners. Christ told us to go out, preach to the sinners, love the sinners, make disciples of them. And we can't do that by pointing fingers at them and judging them. We need to open the doors to the church for these people, not be so closed off that when they walk into the church, and I don't know how it is where you are, but especially in the South, you people walk into the church, they get looked at, especially small town churches. They're being judged as soon as they walk in the door by what they wear. It shouldn't be like that,
Yeah. I have I've built a good relationship with Tullian Chividjian, and so many people may know him. He was a very well-known pastor years back. He's the grandson of Billy Graham, and he went through a very, very public display of disaster. Cheated on his wife, was caught, fell into sin, was kicked out of the pulpit, rightfully so. And this guy walks this very public path of repentance, restoration. And here he is all these years later, and this is up for debate, even though I agree with him. Like, he finds himself back years and years later leading a church. And I personally believe that a man can be restored to the pulpit wisely over a period of time. But again, that's up for debate. But it's interesting to me how, I think it's been 7 years, I still see people railing on him constantly for what he did way back then, number one. And two, the fact that now he is out there and he believes his call is, again, he preaches the gospel clearly, but he's out there saying there is grace for every single one of you. And again, it can be abused, but we spend so much time trying to tear people down when they are at their worst, when we should be trying to find ways to point them to the one that will save them from it all.
That's it. The story you were just, I'm the same way. I was divorced. So I've actually had people tell me, well, you can't preach because you're divorced. I'm like, I'm redeemed.
Yeah, heck yeah.
I know I can stand up and tell people about Christ. He uses my divorce, my failed marriage, and where I am now to be an example for any kind of man that's going through that. That was the lowest point in my life where you asked when I discovered I needed to come back to Christ. And I was suicidal, thinking about suicide. I was right there. 2 days before Christmas, the lady I was renting a room from stole all the money I had to buy my kids Christmas presents. I was done. And that's, I was on my knees, and you can't fall off the floor. How I had to look up to God. He answered all my prayers. And I thank God for it every day. So who am I not to go out and look at these people that are going through these problems? These men that are struggling with addiction, struggling with a failed marriage, lost their kids like I did. I need to be the one. If nobody else, well, I'm going to stand in that gap. So that's where I am now.
So Daniel, when you're going through this season of life again, like you own the fact that you make this mistake, that you sin, but you get pushed out by the people that love you. This leads you down a path of making some more bad decisions at times, but all the while you are keeping intention. And I'm sure it wasn't smooth as this, but you're trying to show up for your kids. You're trying to support them, trying to be there. So what do you feel like was keeping you in a place where you were able to make some good decisions as God would call you to, all the while you had the world tugging at you to be in this gang and biker gang and to be involved in drugs? Like what do you feel like was holding you up during that time to still try to faithfully serve, at least as a father?
Right. 100%. He never left my side. I may have strayed off the path. I may have walked away, but he was always there. he's always going to be there for us. So I was saved at 8 years old as a young child. The difference was I had an encounter with Christ, but I never did build on that relationship, which oftentimes is something that is not preached in the traditional Baptist, not really Southern Baptist, but I was missionary Baptist. I'll just put it like that. And it's based on you're a sinner. If you don't repent, you're going to hell. Over and over and over again. It's the same message. And I understand we need to be preaching to sinners and to the lost and getting people saved. But we need to build a relationship with Christ. We need to show people how to walk with Christ. Because if you're not walking with him, you're going to fall away. You're going to fail. You're going to go out there and the world's going to attack you. They are constantly. They still attack me, no matter how strong my faith is. Today, I still get attacked constantly. As a lot of old preachers like to say, the old flesh still likes to come out. And it's hard, you know. It can happen that easily. So he was always there by me. And I knew that, you know, I still had that ingrained in me. My heart was I was saved by him. He didn't leave me. Like I said, I left that walk with him. And that's what kept me propped up.
And were you, as you're on your kind of journey in the wilderness for all those years, as you're getting your life back together, were you in community? Like, did you have other guys around you that were supporting you and encouraging you in your faith, or no?
Absolutely. There were guys in the motorcycle club where I'm going to give a big shout out to this group right now. It's Tribe of Judah Motorcycle Ministry. They're based out of Houston, Texas. They go into these clubhouses. They go into these dark places that, like I said, a lot of preachers won't just walk into. There are other groups. Tribe of Judah was the most helpful in my life. One of my best friends is a member. He's also a pastor. They were always there and always coming up, encouraging me. I don't know what he saw in me, but he always pursued me. I'd see him coming in the front door of the clubhouse. I would go out the back just to try and get away from him because I knew he was going to talk to me about Christ. And so, yes, there are those people in that world. They're few and far between, but there are a lot of good folks like that. And the clubs that are like that, they're absolutely wonderful. So that actually that helped me when I came back to Christ. He actually, when I rededicated my life to Christ, my buddy Chris, he rebaptized me at church. He was there for me that day, and we're still walking with Christ together right now.
Wow.
It's absolutely amazing people. So,
How did you find your way into that space?
as far as the motorcycle club world,
Yeah.
I had just gotten out of the Army. I went in, I got medicaled out, and I was always looking for a group, something bigger, something to be a part of. Not knowing back then my calling was for Christ. I mean, that's where I needed to be following. Instead, I was chasing this other world, the party, the drugs, the women, the riding motorcycles all over the country. It was just a fun lifestyle. And the camaraderie, with my group, I could go 2 hours any direction and that's what somewhere to sleep, lay my head down, stay the night, party. And it was just an allure, it was pretty exciting. And I loved it. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
But
I appreciate
it led to a bad path.
I really appreciate you saying that. So I have a very close family member that many, many years ago turned to the gay lifestyle. And initially, the primary reason he did was because of the community. Because, and this doesn't always make it right. So I'm not saying that this makes it right, but he was struggling to be included and cared for and supported as he was struggling in just life, right? He was caught up in a lot of different things, getting into trouble and drugs and stuff like that. And he was having a hard time finding acceptance. And all of a sudden he starts to gravitate towards this community that is very loving and accepting. And I know there's people that are listening right now. They're like, yeah, but. And I'm like, just shut your butts up for a second, because it's like, we all desire
for this sense of belonging and the sense of worth and being seen and loved. And unfortunately, and I think this is what you're sharing is, especially when we're caught up in some desire to sin, even if it's not the will to sin, but we're caught up in some desire to do something that is sin, and then we find a group that will celebrate that with us. I mean, it's just game on, right? And so he found his way into that, and that led to then him living the lifestyle for a long period of time, has now since come out of that many, many years later. But I think, again, as we're talking about, and this is not a podcast to try and poke holes at the church, because I am a deep believer in the local church. I love my local church. I believe every Christian needs to be in the church. But I do feel like this is another place where across the country in different ways, through the cultural contexts, that church does not do a good job of not even welcoming in the sinner into community, but even welcoming in their own people into community. It's like, oh, you do life a little bit different than we do. You're not welcome here. This church doesn't have a young marrieds group, so I can't be here because there's nobody else like me. It's like, we need to figure out ways to be better about Acts 2ing the church, because they were from all different backgrounds, all different beliefs, and they all seem to come together and do pretty well. And so I think that's what you're like, that seemed to be your draw. And then obviously God was gracious enough to draw you through that into a community that both honored him and supported that desire you had, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the church nowadays, and you brought up the gay community, and that's something that I've had debate, especially, like I said, I'm in the South and the Bible Belt, and homosexuality is a thing. Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't condone the homosexual lifestyle, but I'm not going to judge him any more than what's the difference in that and the Baptist preacher that goes and sits down at the all-you-can-eat buffet at the church and eats a big meal? That's gluttony. Am I correct? Sin in God's eye is a sin. That's my firm belief. He can forgive you. He's going to love you. And the church needs to be loving on everybody that is out there. I love my church. And that is one thing. My wife and I have found a great church home, and they are out in places doing the work of God like that. And it's the way it's supposed to be. Heaven's doors are open for everybody. So, I mean, and none of us are going to live a perfect life. So we just need to strive for that.
And when you got married to your wife, was she deeply involved in the church at that time?
No, my wife, now we've been married, it'll be 2 years in April. And I thank God for this woman. No, she had just moved back to Tennessee from out west. And, the reason she was here actually is that her mother was involved with the deaf church, through our church. So her mom moved to Nashville with the deaf church. So, and we searched for a while. She's a great Christian lady, and we searched for a while, and we found our church. But the church actually is the reason we're together. So that's another reason for me to love my church. Yeah. So just random. I mean, she's an amazing wife. She's a nurse. And she's my rock. She supports me in everything I do in this ministry. Everywhere I go, they'll tell people about the Lord. Now, she may dislike it sometimes when we're out in public because I can't talk to anybody, anywhere, anytime. She still understands. So, yeah.
That's
I am
so
truly, God has really blessed me with the family I have. And any men that are out there that are going through this, and number one, try to reconcile with your wife if you're going through a divorce first and foremost. Second, if you can't, I mean, he will find you somebody. He restored everything I had before. And I gained 2 more sons in the meanwhile. He has truly blessed me in this marriage. And that is one thing. We put him first in our lives. We pray together. We do Bible devotionals together, everything. So we're not ashamed to live like that now. Our marriage is so much better for that.
Dude, I think what's so just amazing about that, I almost said the word rad, and I think I would have lost like half the audience. I think what's so amazing about that is you
you tested this world in so many ways on your own to find fulfillment and enjoyment and whatever. And it was just hitting a wall, hitting a wall, hitting a wall. And you eventually, you said, on your knees, on the floor, contemplating no more life. So you had to see the worst of it in order to recognize just how amazing life is. And that's actually something that, and I think you probably would agree, being in the Bible Belt where you are. So in Southern California, where I'm at, Southern California Christianity is pretty easy. And what I mean by that is pretty much anybody can go to church. There's not a lot of accountability in most of the big churches. So like they're a Christian on Sunday and kind of just do whatever throughout the rest of the week. And it's because they've never really faced a significant amount of adversity, and they've never truly had to depend on something other than themselves, right? I mean, we're pretty affluent around here. And so it's like, I work hard, I make good money, I drive nice cars, my kids are pretty happy and healthy. So I go to church because I want to do a good thing, but I'm not really desperate to depend. And it sounds like, again, in your world, and this was mine too, it's like, oh no, we were scraping the bottom. And once we realized how bad the bottom is, like we ain't never going back. And so that's that full pursuit. And so do you find, because you talked about your ministry, and I know you've shared this, so you get the opportunity to go around to other churches and to be able to share your testimony and to share your heart for what God is calling you to. Do you find a lot that is kind of the opposition to the message you're preaching, is like these people have kind of just grown up around church, they've been in the Bible their whole lives, and so it's like they're living it, but they're not really living it?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of 1 day a week Christians in the South. You check that box off on Sunday, Monday through Saturday, you're out living your life. And that is a growing epidemic in the church world right now. People do not know how to pray. And I say this loosely, the way that we need to. I mean, just you look at the country as a whole. And this is something else I wanted to touch on. This leads me right into that. Fathers, especially nowadays, are not leading their families the way they need to. I was guilty of it 100%. And you see where it led me. Now I've got teenage boys, and teenage boys are tough. And you look at them, you're thinking, I did the same thing as a teenage boy, But as praying fathers and being the example in households today, I think that's what we're failing. And a lot of that would lead back to the church and just saying, hey, I'm going to check this box off on Sundays, Monday through Saturday. I'm going to live my life, and I'm going to take money or do whatever you have to do. Chase a good time. Fathers need to be back to leading their households in a biblical way. That way, the next generation of men can go out and lead their households in a biblical way. And I'm just not talking to the fathers and the son relationship. Let's talk about your daughters. I've got 3 daughters as well. You are the example for your daughters and how they need to be treated. So we need to get back to that way of life. And the world is 100%. I say 100%. If you look at our nation right now, in this past election, we had this country is 50% against religious people right now, and I say that it's the truth. The Christians are being attacked in this country and our beliefs. So it's our job to keep our kids on the right track. We can complain about the schools going woke or the education systems. That's our fault.
Yeah,
Why
that's
aren't
right.
we, the school boards, pushing this stuff? And so I think that's where I am now as well. It's amazing that I concentrated on myself for so long. It was myself, me. Now, I was a great provider for my family. I was a terrible husband and a father. So, and this, God gave me a second chance at marriage and being involved with these kids, and then giving me 2 extra boys to be a good influence. So, and I'm trying to do the best I can. And it's hard in this world. It is very hard sometimes.
Yeah, man, it is. I mean, I've got a 22-year-old and a 15-year-old, and my 15-year-old only knows me as a Christian. My 22-year-old was around before we came to Christ. By God's grace, I don't know how she's not so screwed up, but she was not, she was not stained by our early life. So I take that responsibility on. They're both dating boys now, and same thing, like trying to be good influences to them. It's funny that you bring up the example thing. This is such a silly little example, but it's something that really stood out to me this morning. So I'm sitting at breakfast by myself this morning in a local bagel shop, and this family of 4 sits down, mom and dad and 2 little boys. They're probably 8 and 6-ish, around there, maybe 10 and 8, somewhere around there. Anyway, so they sit down, they get their food brought to the table. The dad takes like 4 bites of his bagel, and he gets up and he walks outside. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. He goes right to the front of the store where you can see. He pulls a pack of cigarettes out of his pocket, puts a cigarette in his mouth, and proceeds to start smoking. And again, I take heat for like dumb little things, but I'll say this too. It's like, so here's this dad that was willing to interrupt breakfast with his family to go smoke a cigarette, right? Like I'm that addicted to whatever, anything, that I'm willing to sacrifice a moment with my family so then mom can take on trying to make sure the kids are corralled and doing things and go feed my addiction. And then number 2, the dad looks in the window with the cigarette in his mouth and smiles to his kid. And again, to each their own. But to me, I look at that and I'm like, yo, you just looked at your kid with a cancer stick in your mouth and said, hey, look what dad does. You should do it too. That's exactly what I felt. And then the older of the 2 kids ends up going outside and going to chase his dad, outside. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, this has nothing to do with Christianity. This has nothing to do with anything, to do with that. But I'm like, here is another example. And I've been there too, but like, here's another example of where a man failed. Like, you are to be present. You are to be the leader. You are to be an example. And you're willing to set your family aside for your addiction and then to be the example that your addiction is okay in front of your kids. I'm just like, what the frick is wrong with people?
Yeah. I lost my kids for a period of time through my divorce, and it was terrible. That's what almost drove me over the edge with my addiction, and that's what caused that in the lifestyle I was living. Looking back now, and I swore to my children at that point in time when I got them back, I'm never going to lose you again. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure I'm in your life, whether it's driving 2 hours. I mean, I would drive at one time 8 hours on Sundays to take my kids back to their moms and back to home. Whatever it takes just to be in your kids' lives. Dad, I understand the pursuit of money, the pursuit of happiness. You still got to prioritize. I mean, I've got a 20-year-old. She'll be 20 in April. And I missed so much of her life and my 16-year-old son's life by just being out doing bad things. Now, also looking back at that, I see the influence that had on my 16-year-old son. He was around when Dad was out. He grew up around the clubhouses. He grew up on the back of a Harley. He grew up seeing me and my addiction and stuff. Maybe not realizing what it was then. And maybe, just wondering where Dad was at while he was in the bed recovering or whatever. And I don't want him to have to go through that. And I think that's another important thing we can get to is we have to be honest with our children about these things. I don't sugarcoat anything, especially with my 2 older boys. Now, the younger 3, I keep some of that away from them. My 2 older boys, hey, I'm completely open and honest with them. Look, if you do this, it's going to lead you down this path. I know I can't be there all the time with you. I know you're going to try things, but also I love you. Call me. I'll come get you if you're out doing something. And I think that's where fathers we need to be at. You have to be honest with your kids. We have to lead them. Let them make mistakes, but don't let it deter their lives from where they're going. Always be that positive influence. So
yeah, that's great. It's great advice. I think it's you try to do the best you can to prepare for and plan for your kids growing up. And I mean, thankfully for me, our kids have been pretty dang good, for the most part. Never gotten in any real trouble, but it's like, you never know. And I think that, by that advice that you gave, to be a great example, but then also to be openly communicative, not just about where you came up short, but about your expectations and about your love for them regardless. I think that would prevent so many heartaches that we see in families if parents were just willing to openly listen to the struggles that their children are going through. And yes, to be a parent, to set rules, to punish when they break the rules, but at the same time, like, welcome them in. Like we would always say to our kids, like, you can tell us anything. You may get in trouble, but it's going to be far better than if we find out on our own.
Yeah.
And our kids, like they believe that for the most part. Every once in a while, they would still lie, and it was like, what is wrong with you? And I remember they would say something to the effect of, well, we thought you would just be so mad. I know you said that if we lied, it's worse, but I was just, and I was like, okay, we understand, right? And we would always try to temper that a little bit, but I think that is so important. So I think that's such wise advice, that you gave. So now, you're getting this opportunity to go around to share your testimony. Where I'm pretty clear, but like, where do you feel God is really calling you into? Because you're not a full-time pastor. You've got a day job, which you can do that forever, and that's totally fine. But like, where do you feel God is calling you?
Well, within the past 2 weeks, I actually applied to seminary school, waiting for to see if I got accepted into that. And we'll see where that goes. Honestly, I love helping the kids. My wife is she believes I should be doing teen counseling or something like that. She's actually got a psychology degree as well as her nursing degree. So we need to open something up like that just for teens. It's so hard to find that, at least in Middle Tennessee, to where teens can just sit down and talk to somebody. No judgment. Just tell us what's going on. And I think that's something. I love helping kids. I love coaching kids. I coach youth sports. I coach my stepson's Little League baseball team. So, that's something I love, being around and just helping those kids. And I think that's where I'm headed. Before I started work and when I was younger and going to school, I was going to school to be a special education teacher. So that's sort of where it's always been. It's just taken me a long time to get back to doing that and stuff. So, I would really love to be involved with the teenagers, and especially teenage boys, and just helping them, manipulate this world that they're living in now. When you and I were growing up, it was completely different times. These kids are facing so much more today with social media. I hear nightmare stories from my two teenage boys about what they deal with at school. The levels of just negativity being thrown out there, and the influence. It's scary. It's extremely scary. And not only that, when we were young, we could go home and get away from some of that stuff.
Yeah.
We didn't have the social media stuff to where, hey, I'm going to log in and see what somebody said. And I think that's really detrimental to what's going on with a lot of these teenagers today. The suicide rate of teenagers has skyrocketed in the United States right now. And there's a lot of depression out there for these kids. And I hope and pray that maybe I can influence some of them in some way. Anybody I come in contact with, just do what the Lord calls me to do in that. So,
yeah, dude, that's so dope. I mean, it's an absolute necessity. And I love the fact that, you have that heart. I mean, this world, generally speaking, needs good, godly men to stand up, to stand firm, to be better providers and protectors for sure. But to our youth, they are exposed to so much. I mean, when you think about the way that an adult today handles social media and news and politics and religion, like adults can't handle most of the stuff. So then how do we expect that a kid is ever going to be able to navigate this world on their own? And so having somebody like you to be able to step in, not just with the head knowledge, but with the experiential godly wisdom of going through all that you have, to be able to be like, dude, I get it, but that's not the path you want. Here's a better path, and here's why,
Exactly right. I having two teenage boys, I know I'm not the cool dad sometimes to them, but going in, and if I've learned kids will open up just if you show a little interest in them. Walk up to, especially in youth sports and stuff, ask these kids how their days are going. Find something out about what's going on in their life. And a lot of times they will open up and start talking to you about stuff. And that's what we need. Church, youth groups, anything. If people are out there looking for something to get their kids, youth groups are a great place to start. Youth sports is a great place to start. I know a lot of times there are those dad coaches that can get a little bit overboard, but the right group, the right coach can make a great influence on your children. and we need to get them involved. Idle time for these kids, terrible. Video games. It's a struggle in my house, keeping kids off the iPad, the computers, the video games. And that's, got to keep these kids busy, get them outside, get them moving. And I think that's where helping these kids is what I'm called to.
So good, man. Well, like I said, I mean, from the first time that we talked, actually when we were even just DMing back and forth on X, and then when we talked, and then even now, it's like I appreciate guys like you so much, because it's an encouragement to me. I think that it gets kind of frustrating sometimes when we feel like, we're doing what we can. We can always do better, but when we're doing what we can, it feels like no headway is being made, and there's a lot of negativity out in the world. But then I come across a dude like you that is just out there in the middle of Tennessee, just serving the Lord with your whole heart, and knowing that you don't have it all together, but you're giving it everything you can. And I think the world is a better place because of guys like you in it. So it's amazing, man.
I appreciate that, man. And if there's anybody out there going through this, just keep your head up. It's a day at a time. I know, looking back on my addiction, there were so many times I was just ready to give up, and something would pull me to the next day. And I know now that was Christ. At the time, whatever it be, I'm sorry, you've got to find that motivation. Keep putting one foot in front of the other and keep going. And eventually you're going to get to the top of the mountain. It's going to happen. Lean on the Lord, and He'll take care of you every time.
So that's the mic drop right there. Thank you, Daniel, so much again. Thank you guys to everybody that's listened, that supports. Questions and concerns around this stuff, hit me up. It's so important that we take these things to heart, that we take them seriously. But I appreciate all the support that we get and listening to the podcast and the feedback that we do. So thank you, Daniel, again. Thank you guys so much. Chat with you soon.